I never imagined that dividing an inheritance could turn into a battlefield. But some family gatherings have a way of revealing who people really are. The estate had been in the family for generations, filled with heirlooms, antiques, and small treasures collected carefully over decades. My sister, usually calm and rational, had suddenly erupted with demands. She insisted, loudly and firmly, that everything be split evenly. Her voice carried an authority that made it clear she expected immediate compliance, as if fairness could be measured purely in numbers and fractions, ignoring history, responsibility, and character. Her husband, standing silently by, seemed uncomfortable, but I could see him taking quiet satisfaction in her dominance. She had always loved the appearance of fairness, the neat lines, the clear divisions, but she rarely considered the hidden truths beneath the surface. Who actually cared for Grandma in her final years? Who had shown loyalty during hardship? Who had been present when it mattered most? The insistence on even division was not about justice. It was about control, ego, and the appearance of righteousness. I listened quietly, letting her words settle in the air. "Split it evenly," she repeated, almost like a mantra. The room was tense. Cousins exchanged glances, some smirking, some unsure. The rest of the family had been silent, waiting to see how I would respond. I realized immediately that this moment was about more than inheritance. It was a test, a measure of integrity, and a reflection of human behavior under pressure. She believed that equality meant fairness, but I knew that fairness and equality are not always the same thing. The truth was simple. Fairness requires discernment, not arithmetic. She had ignored years of observation, small sacrifices, and countless acts of loyalty that could not be quantified in coins, percentages, or percentages of land. She wanted a formulaic solution to a human problem, a flat division that overlooked nuance. And that arrogance, that insistence, would shape the decision I was about to make. I took a deep breath and began explaining, calmly, that not all family members are alike. Some have demonstrated generosity, care, and integrity throughout the years. Others have caused strife, resentment, and division. I did not name names, but the room could feel the unspoken truth hanging in the air. The atmosphere thickened as she realized I was not going to comply with her demands blindly. She looked at me incredulously, as if to say, "How dare you challenge my sense of fairness?" I continued, carefully, letting the words flow without anger, but with unmistakable clarity. True fairness, I explained, requires acknowledgement of past actions and responsibilities. It is not blind equality. Some have carried burdens quietly, given more than they ever received, and respected the legacy of this family. Others have only counted coins, claimed credit, and sowed discord. If we truly wish to honor fairness, we must consider these realities. Her face reddened. She had expected a simple yes, a mechanical agreement to divide assets as she demanded. Instead, she received analysis, judgment, and subtle confrontation, all without raising my voice. This was the pivotal moment. She was used to commanding, to being obeyed, but now she was forced to pause, reflect, and consider that her vision of fairness was not universal truth. The room was silent, tension heavy, as she weighed her options. I could see the wheels turning in her mind, the struggle between ego and acknowledgement of reality. Then came the demand again, sharper this time. "Split it evenly. I'm not arguing anymore. Do it." She was frustrated, flustered, and impatient. But I had already made my decision. I knew that compliance would reward entitlement and diminish integrity. Instead, I would teach a lesson that was as firm as it was deliberate. The estate would not be divided equally. It would be given to the family member who had been overlooked, underestimated, and labeled the black sheep for decades. The room went still. Whispers started, soft but growing, as she realized my intention. The black sheep, the cousin no one expected to succeed, the one dismissed as careless, unreliable, or reckless, would inherit the estate. She gasped, disbelief etched on her face. Her mantra of even division crumbled as she witnessed the consequences of her assumptions. She had counted on uniformity, control, and predictability, and now faced an outcome she had never imagined. I began explaining why, carefully and clearly, without malice. This person, I said, has endured judgment, ridicule, and exclusion. They have been underestimated, overlooked, and dismissed. Yet they have remained steadfast, loyal, and genuine. Their actions have consistently demonstrated respect for our family, care for its members, and integrity in every interaction. If fairness truly matters, if true justice is our goal, then they are the rightful inheritor. Her face turned from disbelief to anger, a subtle tremor in her voice as she protested. That's not fair. They've caused trouble for years. They're reckless. They don't deserve everything. Her arguments were familiar. They were the same excuses used by the family for decades to justify dismissing him. But I remained calm, letting her words fade into silence, knowing that the power of action and principle outweighed arguments and outbursts. I detailed, without emotion but with precision, the long history of care and contribution. The black sheep had quietly supported family members during crises, had respected values that others had ignored, and had acted with discretion and generosity when no one was watching. Meanwhile, those demanding equality had only ever counted their share, measured success superficially, and asserted authority without understanding responsibility. It was a stark contrast, and the room could feel the weight of truth pressing against assumption. By the end of the discussion, it was clear that my decision was final. The black sheep would inherit the estate. She realized, reluctantly, that her insistence on equal division had been short-sighted, her assumptions flawed. She had expected compliance, agreement, and affirmation, and instead received judgment, reflection, and a reversal that defied expectation. The lesson was clear. Entitlement does not equal merit. Loud demands do not override integrity, and legacy belongs to those who respect it, not those who simply demand it. The moment was tense, yet satisfying. The air in the room had shifted, the family dynamic subtly but permanently altered. Those who had previously judged and dismissed the black sheep now understood the consequences of underestimation. The family member once overlooked now held the keys to the estate, a symbol of resilience, patience, and overlooked value. The lesson was quiet but unmistakable. True fairness is not measured in even slices, but in acknowledgement of character, responsibility, and loyalty. The day after the announcement, tension lingered like a thick fog. My sister, still reeling from the reality that her demands had been ignored, moved through the house with quiet indignation. She didn't speak directly to me, but her eyes betrayed a mix of disbelief and resentment. For decades, she had assumed that her voice, her insistence, and her expectations would dictate outcomes. Yet here, in the aftermath of her failed demand, she faced a harsh truth. Authority is meaningless without wisdom, and entitlement does not guarantee results. The black sheep, on the other hand, moved cautiously, a mixture of pride and disbelief crossing his face. No one had expected this outcome. Not him, not the rest of the family. He had been dismissed, laughed at, and sidelined for years. Yet here he was, suddenly entrusted with the estate. I could see the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders, the realization that inheritance is not just a reward, but a test of judgment, care, and resilience. He understood that what he had received came not from favoritism, but from the acknowledgement of integrity, loyalty, and patience. I gathered the family in the living room to explain the practicalities of managing the estate. I emphasized accountability, stewardship, and transparency. The black sheep listened intently, taking careful notes, asking questions, and considering every detail. His demeanor was calm, thoughtful, and deliberate, a stark contrast to the hubris and impatience that had characterized the earlier demands of my sister. It was clear that he was beginning to internalize the responsibility, understanding that inheritance is never merely possession, but a duty to honor the past and safeguard the future. Meanwhile, my sister paced the room, muttering under her breath, struggling to process the reality. She had believed that fairness was simply a matter of arithmetic, that demanding equality would satisfy justice. Instead, she was confronted with a deeper principle. True fairness requires discernment, not uniformity. The realization unsettled her, forcing her to confront the consequences of her assumptions. It was a lesson she had never learned before, one that could not be ignored or easily dismissed. As the day progressed, I worked closely with the black sheep to organize the estate, cataloging valuable items, and assessing the practicalities of inheritance. We discussed maintenance of the property, care of heirlooms, and management of financial assets. Each conversation reinforced responsibility, highlighting the importance of deliberate action, careful planning, and respect for what had been entrusted. He absorbed each detail with diligence and humility, demonstrating that the lessons he had learned extended far beyond entitlement, greed, or desire. By mid-afternoon, my sister attempted to intervene, proposing an even split once again, her tone more restrained but no less insistent. I calmly explained why this was not appropriate. Equality in distribution ignores the nuances of loyalty, effort, and respect, I said. True fairness takes these factors into account. The person who receives the estate must have demonstrated the qualities required to manage it responsibly. Anything less would dishonor the legacy. Her protests fell flat. The family understood the reasoning, even if some were secretly amused by her flustered expression. The contrast between my sister's approach and the black sheep's behavior was striking. She demanded, argued, and attempted to impose her will, relying on authority and expectation alone. He listened, absorbed lessons, and acted with prudence, care, and deliberation. It was a living demonstration of principle. Those who act from integrity and responsibility always surpass those who act from entitlement and ego. I allowed this contrast to remain evident, knowing that the lesson would resonate far longer when observed rather than told. In the evening, we discussed the emotional implications of inheritance. I reminded everyone that wealth, while tangible, carries intangible responsibilities: trust, memory, and respect for those who came before. The black sheep understood this fully, reflecting thoughtfully on the sacrifices, decisions, and foresight of previous generations. My sister, meanwhile, struggled to accept that compliance with her wishes would have undermined justice, rewarding arrogance over integrity. The lesson was difficult for her, yet undeniably clear. Fairness is not always equal division, and entitlement does not equate to merit. That night, after everyone had left, I reflected on the events of the day. The estate had not only been reassigned, it had become a mirror, reflecting values, priorities, and character. Those who had demanded, expected, or assumed had been shown the limits of entitlement. Those who had acted with patience, care, and loyalty had been recognized. The black sheep, once dismissed and underestimated, now carried the tangible and symbolic weight of responsibility, a lesson to all that true value is earned, not claimed. The next morning, my sister approached me privately, her expression a mix of frustration and reluctant acknowledgement. "I still don't agree with how you handled it," she said, her voice quieter now, lacking the certainty of the previous day. "But I see why you did it. It's just hard to accept." I nodded, offering no argument. Acceptance is not won by persuasion, but by observation and reflection. The events of the previous day had demonstrated the principle more clearly than any lecture ever could. She would need time, and that was enough. Meanwhile, the black sheep continued to immerse himself in responsibility. He created schedules, organized inventories, and developed systems for maintaining the estate. Each task he approached with care and thoughtfulness, proving that his inheritance was more than just luck or circumstance. It was recognition of character and integrity. His actions contrasted sharply with the demands of entitlement, serving as a living example of how responsibility and diligence create lasting value. By midday, whispers from extended family members began to circulate. Some expressed quiet admiration for the black sheep, surprised at how competently he was managing the estate. Others muttered about fairness, reflecting on the contrast between those who demanded and those who earned. It was clear that the events had shifted perceptions, subtly but permanently. The lesson had been delivered, not through confrontation or anger, but through careful action, reflection, and the undeniable demonstration of principle. As afternoon approached, my sister attempted to interject once more, suggesting minor adjustments. I allowed her input but framed the discussion around accountability and justification. Each proposal was examined, not dismissed, but evaluated against actions, loyalty, and integrity. She began to see, slowly, that decisions guided by character, responsibility, and foresight outweigh mere insistence or equality. It was an uncomfortable revelation, but a necessary one. Fairness is not always arithmetic, and entitlement rarely produces wisdom. By the end of the day, the black sheep had firmly established his role as steward of the estate. He had absorbed lessons, demonstrated competence, and gained the respect of the family, even those who had doubted him for years. My sister, still grappling with the implications, began to understand that her demands had been based on assumption, not discernment. The estate, the decisions, and the behavior of all involved had transformed a simple distribution of assets into a profound lesson in fairness, responsibility, and the value of integrity. The following morning brought a new perspective. The black sheep, once marginalized and underestimated, was now actively managing the estate with diligence and care. He moved through each room, cataloging heirlooms, inspecting properties, and ensuring that every item was preserved and accounted for. His focus and meticulous attention to detail were stark contrasts to my sister's earlier demands, which had been rooted in ego and immediate gratification. The lesson was no longer theoretical. It was lived and visible, a testament to the power of integrity and responsibility. My sister lingered in the background. Her presence marked more by observation than intervention. She had begun to notice the differences in approach, patience versus impatience, care versus disregard, understanding versus assumption. I could see the gears turning in her mind as she reflected on how her demands had led not to fairness but to chaos and frustration. It was a subtle awakening, and though pride prevented full acknowledgement, the seed of comprehension had been planted. I called a family meeting to discuss the estate's ongoing management. The black sheep presented his plans, inventory systems, maintenance schedules, and financial accountability measures. He spoke calmly, confidently, and clearly, demonstrating a depth of understanding that no one had anticipated. The contrast with my sister was glaring. She had demanded control without comprehension, while he now demonstrated capability grounded in experience, reflection, and care. The room, once tense with contention, had shifted to quiet admiration. During the discussion, my sister attempted to challenge minor decisions, but I guided the conversation toward principle. We are not dividing based on desire or loudness of voice, I explained. We are distributing responsibilities according to demonstrated competence, loyalty, and respect. These are the qualities that sustain legacy, not the insistence of entitlement. Her protests became quieter, more reasoned, and eventually transformed into tentative questions rather than demands. She began to see, if only partially, that her vision of fairness was incomplete. Over the next few days, the black sheep immersed himself in the management of the estate. He handled everything with precision. He organized records, coordinated repairs, and ensured the preservation of valuables. Each task he completed reflected foresight, patience, and an understanding of responsibility that far exceeded mere desire or expectation. Meanwhile, my sister's insistence on equality waned, replaced by reluctant acknowledgement. She began to witness, firsthand, that stewardship requires action, judgment, and ethical consideration, not loud proclamations or demands. I observed quietly, noting the subtle shifts in the family dynamic. The black sheep had gained respect not through entitlement, but through competence and consistency. My sister, previously the loudest voice, was now listening and learning, the experience gradually reshaping her understanding of fairness. The lesson, though delivered with patience and care, was profound. Those who act with integrity are recognized and rewarded, while those who demand without comprehension face disillusionment. By midweek, small but telling changes were evident. The black sheep began making independent decisions regarding the estate, consulting where appropriate but acting decisively. Cousins and extended family members, who had once doubted him, sought his advice and guidance. My sister, witnessing this newfound influence, had to grapple with her prior assumptions. She realized that inheritance is not a prize to be claimed, but a responsibility to be managed, and that those who demonstrate capability and understanding are the ones deserving of trust. We spent an afternoon reviewing the historical significance of the estate's most valuable items. I guided the black sheep through careful examination of heirlooms, explaining their origin, symbolism, and significance. He listened attentively, asked thoughtful questions, and documented observations meticulously. The contrast with my sister's previous approach, superficial, focused on perceived fairness rather than substance, could not have been clearer. He had absorbed the lesson: legacy is preserved through knowledge, care, and responsibility, not entitlement. The emotional dimension of inheritance was not lost on him. He reflected on the sacrifices made by previous generations, the trust invested in him, and the weight of responsibility now placed on his shoulders. Unlike my sister, who had sought only equal division, he understood that stewardship requires empathy, awareness, and deliberate action. The estate became a living classroom, teaching lessons that transcended material wealth and touching on values, ethics, and human character. In the evening, we convened a family discussion to share updates on the estate. The black sheep presented his progress, highlighting achievements and addressing challenges. His clarity, composure, and understanding impressed everyone present, including my sister. For the first time, she experienced the reality of stewardship versus entitlement. She saw how competence, patience, and respect created lasting value, while loud demands, assumptions, and superficial equality produced tension, conflict, and dissatisfaction. By week's end, the transformation was complete. The black sheep had assumed his role fully, managing responsibilities with care, thoughtfulness, and foresight. He had earned respect, built trust, and demonstrated integrity, proving that legacy is not inherited by demand, but by merit. My sister, though still grappling with her emotions, had begun to internalize a crucial lesson. Fairness is not always equality, and entitlement does not guarantee recognition or success. The estate, once a source of contention and division, had become a symbol of principle. It represented the triumph of integrity over entitlement, patience over impatience, and insight over assumption. The black sheep, once dismissed and marginalized, now held a position of trust and authority, reflecting the enduring truth that merit, responsibility, and character outweigh loud demands and superficial fairness. The following week, the black sheep began implementing long-term plans for the estate, approaching each decision with care, foresight, and reflection. Every action reinforced the lessons he had internalized. Stewardship requires diligence, integrity, and an understanding of both tangible and intangible value. From managing financial assets to preserving historical heirlooms, he treated every responsibility as sacred, knowing that mistakes could erode trust and compromise legacy. My sister, still observing from the sidelines, attempted several interventions but quickly realized that her demands for even division were no longer persuasive. The family's respect had shifted. The black sheep's competence had become evident in every interaction, and her insistence on equality now seemed naive, even short-sighted. She began to confront a difficult truth. Fairness is not measured by superficial division, but by recognition of character, contribution, and responsibility. Her voice, once commanding and decisive, was now tentative, reflecting the growing weight of comprehension. We worked together on cataloging and maintaining the estate's most valuable items. Each heirloom, antique or collectible, was handled meticulously, with careful documentation of provenance and history. The black sheep approached this task methodically, asking questions about origins, historical significance, and proper care. It was clear he understood the larger picture. Legacy is more than property. It embodies stories, trust, and responsibility. My sister, witnessing this process, had no choice but to acknowledge the depth of his approach. One afternoon, he discovered a set of letters tucked away in the attic, correspondence spanning decades that chronicled family history, sacrifices, and insights from previous generations. He read each letter carefully, absorbing the lessons embedded in the words. His reflections revealed a maturity that contrasted sharply with my sister's prior insistence on formulaic fairness. She had demanded equality without understanding context. He now embraced insight without complaint, demonstrating that true inheritance extends beyond material wealth into wisdom, empathy, and foresight. By midweek, he was making independent decisions regarding estate management, consulting only when necessary. He demonstrated remarkable judgment, balancing care for property with attention to family relationships and future preservation. Cousins and extended family members, once skeptical, now sought his advice, impressed by his ability to navigate challenges thoughtfully. My sister, meanwhile, began to recognize the consequences of her earlier assumptions. She realized that insisting on equal division could have undermined not only the estate, but the principles of trust, fairness, and responsibility that now guided its management. I allowed the contrast between entitlement and integrity to remain visible. The black sheep's deliberate, thoughtful actions were juxtaposed against my sister's previous approach of impatience and demand. The lesson was now undeniable. Those who act from patience, insight, and responsibility earn respect and trust, while those who demand without understanding often face frustration and disappointment. The estate itself became a living testament to this principle, a tangible reflection of the choices, character, and actions of all involved. One evening, I convened a quiet discussion with the black sheep about the importance of transparency. We reviewed records, reconciled financial statements, and examined the accuracy of inventories. Each task reinforced a critical lesson. Accountability is essential, and inheritance carries both privilege and duty. The black sheep approached these responsibilities with seriousness, care, and humility, understanding that stewardship is an ongoing process, not a one-time reward. My sister, observing from the periphery, absorbed the lesson silently. Over the next few days, he continued to demonstrate initiative. He proposed a restoration project for the estate's oldest structures, consulted experts on preservation, and organized family meetings to ensure transparency in decision-making. His careful attention to detail and respect for history were evident in every interaction. My sister, witnessing this, began to understand that real value lies not in demands, but in diligence, foresight, and ethical action. Her insistence on equality had been replaced, slowly, by an awareness of the deeper principles guiding stewardship. By the end of the week, the black sheep had firmly established his role. He had gained the trust and respect of the family, demonstrating competence, patience, and insight. He had absorbed the lessons of stewardship, legacy, and responsibility, proving that merit, character, and ethical action outweigh entitlement and superficial fairness. My sister, though still grappling with her pride, had begun to internalize a critical truth. Fairness is not always measured in equal shares, and inheritance is earned through integrity, not demand. As the sun set, I observed the quiet transformation of the household. The black sheep moved confidently through the estate, each decision reflecting thought, care, and awareness of long-term consequences. My sister watched, her earlier certainty replaced by reflection and acknowledgement of reality. The estate, once a source of tension and division, had become a living classroom, a space where lessons of fairness, responsibility, and character were made tangible. The final reflection came when the black sheep proposed a family gathering to share the estate's history and significance with all members. He spoke eloquently about the lineage, sacrifices, and principles that had shaped the inheritance. He emphasized the importance of responsibility, respect, and care for future generations. The family, including my sister, listened intently, gaining a renewed appreciation for the deeper meaning of legacy. What had begun as conflict over splitting it evenly had transformed into a profound lesson in stewardship, integrity, and ethical action. The days that followed were marked by quiet reflection and gradual understanding. The black sheep, once dismissed as unreliable, now carried the mantle of responsibility with dignity, patience, and integrity. Every action he took, from organizing the estate to preserving heirlooms, demonstrated a careful balance of foresight and respect. The lesson of entitlement versus stewardship had become tangible, visible in every decision, every thoughtful gesture, and every interaction. My sister, still processing the outcome, observed in silence. She had demanded equality, believing that fairness was a simple calculation of shares, and yet she had been confronted with a reality far more complex. True fairness, she now realized, is grounded in character, contribution, and respect, not in volume of demand or insistence on symmetry. It was a difficult lesson for her to accept, but one that became undeniable with each passing day, as she witnessed the black sheep executing his responsibilities with competence and care. We continued to work closely with him, guiding him through financial management, restoration projects, and strategic decisions regarding the estate. He approached each challenge thoughtfully, weighing risks and benefits, considering both tangible and intangible consequences, and making decisions with deliberation. It was evident to everyone that his inheritance had become a platform for demonstrating leadership, integrity, and discernment, qualities that no entitlement or loud demand could create. One afternoon, he discovered a collection of documents hidden within the estate's archives. They chronicled decades of family history, personal sacrifices, and the unseen contributions of past generations. He read through each carefully, documenting their significance and ensuring their preservation. This attention to historical detail reflected his growing understanding that inheritance is not merely the transfer of property, but a responsibility to honor the legacy of those who came before. My sister, observing this meticulous work, began to comprehend the depth of responsibility that accompanies ownership. As the week progressed, the black sheep implemented systems to ensure transparency and accountability. He created inventories, established maintenance schedules, and set up protocols for managing assets. Cousins and extended family members, who had previously doubted his abilities, now sought his guidance and advice. My sister, realizing the competence and foresight displayed, was forced to acknowledge the stark contrast between his approach and her previous insistence on equal division. The estate had become a tangible example of principle in action. Merit, responsibility, and integrity triumph over entitlement and ego. I spent time reflecting with him on the symbolic L